Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I had the single most terrifying experience of my life last Friday night when my friend Amanda and I got into what turned out to be the completely wrong Uber after a concert downtown. The driver was beyond creepy and suspicious right from the start, and when we realized somewhere along the drive that he definitely was not our actual ride, he refused to let us out of the locked car. We ended up having to forcefully kick open a rear door while he was stopped at a red light, and then make a desperate, adrenaline-fueled run for it out into live traffic. My heart was pounding out of my chest the entire time. It was like something straight out of a horror movie. I'm still shaken up and will now be extremely cautious about using ride shares going forward. Amanda and I had gone to see our favorite band perform at a crowded club downtown. We had an amazing time singing and dancing along, but after the long high-energy show ended close to midnight, we were absolutely drained and ready to head home. Since we'd had a few drinks, we requested an Uber on our phones to safely get back to my apartment uptown. The concert had been incredible, but also massively tiring. By the time we shuffled outside the venue doors to the curb, we were both basically dead on our feet, just wanting to get into bed. So when the dark set and pulled up with the Uber stickers, we blearily confirmed the license plate matched and then collapsed into the backseat, too exhausted to think twice. I did vaguely notice as we pulled away that the driver seemed oddly mute compared to most chatty Uber guys making small talk. He also had a very weird, ominous energy about him that instantly gave me the creeps. I glanced over at Amanda and saw she was also sitting tensely, clearly sensing that something seemed off. We had been driving for maybe 10 minutes, yet were seemingly no closer to my neighborhood. I spoke up politely to ask the driver if this meandering road he was silently taking really was the fastest way back to my area. He continued staring straight ahead, ignoring the question altogether, which ratcheted my anxiety up big time. That's when Amanda and I locked terrified eyes, the realization dawning on us both at once that this clearly was absolutely not our actual called Uber ride after all. Heart pounding, I quickly checked the app and sure enough, the license plate number did not match the one I had ordered. We were apparently in some unidentified vehicle with a total stranger. We sharply commanded the driver that he needed to pull over immediately and let us out right now. But he barely even glanced up, just kept driving faster. When we frantically yelled that we were going to call the police if he didn't stop the car immediately, he let out this bone-chillingly eerie little laugh. Without a word, the driver clicked a button, locking all the doors and blithely stating we were going to continue on for a little joyride, whether we liked it or not. Amanda and I screamed desperately for help, banging on the windows, but the glass was too thick and his radio was turned up too loud for anyone to notice. We were completely trapped and at the mercy of this terrifying monster. Operating solely on adrenaline now, I'd violently try to open my door handle while Amanda did the same on her side. But the child locks were clearly activated, preventing us from escaping the moving vehicle. We were absolute hostages to this sadistic madman, and I have never felt more purely panicked in my life. As we approached a red light, the driver was forced to slow to a stop. Seizing the one golden opportunity, I braced myself against the seat back and ferociously kicked at my door handle over and over until it painfully cracked open. We immediately leaped out and sprinted down the block through stunned oncoming traffic without looking back once. I heard the sickening squeal of the enraged driver peeling away from the light, but we just kept blindly running for several blocks in case he looped around to come after us. My lungs were burning, but I didn't dare stop. Our only focus was getting somewhere public and safe. We finally came upon an open 24-hour diner and rushed inside, collapsing breathlessly into a booth. We both burst into horrified tears as the reality of what nearly happened truly set in. The gracious staff quickly got us glasses of water and let us contact people for help. Still shaking, we provided the police as many identifying details about the driver and vehicle as we could remember once they arrived. They said these rideshare kidnapping attempts were on the rise and solemnly warned us to be extremely vigilant about double-checking license plates matched before ever getting into a car. Otherwise, we could have easily been the next victims. After that night, Amanda and I only ever took Ubers together and compulsively made drivers confirm our names and destinations multiple times. but we remained completely traumatized, with me suffering intense panic attacks if I even saw a similar car model. The endless what-ifs will forever haunt me. We know the police likely never caught the predator since rideshare criminals constantly switch up vehicles. But the reality is I came mere minutes away from likely becoming either a grim headline or just another tragic missing persons case that night. It makes me physically ill picturing whatever that monster had sinisterly planned for us. The harsh truth this experience impressed upon me is that you simply can never be too wary or vigilant, even when you assume you're just getting a safe ride home. Amanda and I got profoundly lucky that night, but we will forever carry the emotional weight of what very nearly happened to us both. I'm just overwhelmingly grateful we somehow mustered the courage and quick instincts in that split second of opportunity to enact our bold escape plan. I had an incredibly harrowing encounter with a passenger one late weekend night while driving for Uber to try and earn some extra cash. The guy I picked up was absolutely wasted after a night of heavy partying at the clubs. Within minutes of getting in my back seat, he suddenly brandished a pocket knife inches from my face, violently demanding I hand over all my money. I was able to think quickly and stop the car short, wrestling the blade out of his hand before forcing him out onto the curb and speeding off to call the police. My heart was hammering the entire terrifying ordeal. It was a chilling reminder of the very real risks rideshare drivers face regularly. I had signed up to drive for Uber since I was painfully short on money that month and desperately needed to supplement my paltry earnings from my weekday office job. I don't normally love the idea of chauffeuring strangers around, but figured I could grit my teeth and handle some weekend night shifts if it meant pulling in vital extra income between paychecks. I hoped most passengers would just be normal people responsibly getting themselves home after dinners or events. It was around 2 a.m. on a Saturday night when I got a trip request from outside a notoriously rowdy club downtown. As I pulled up to the requested location, I spotted a rowdy group of clearly intoxicated people stumbling around the sidewalk, shouting and shoving each other as they looked for their ride. One guy who could barely stand without swaying violently soon came lurching over to my car by himself. As soon as he yanked open the door and collapsed into the back seat, the overpowering stench of hard liquor engulfed the vehicle, and it was painfully obvious this passenger was dangerously wasted. He struggled unsuccessfully for several minutes to slur out an address, cursing and fumbling with his phone. I'll admit I felt extremely wary starting the trip with him in that state, but ultimately wanted to get him home safely without any escalating incident. We started driving, and at first the guy was nearly passed out, intermittently groaning and dry heaving as I navigated us cautiously through the city streets. But within a few minutes, he suddenly jolted forward, erratically wrapping his arms around the headrest of my seat. He began mumbling incoherently about how unbearably tough his life was and how nobody understood the struggles he faced. Remaining calm, I politely asked him to please sit back and put on his seatbelt for both our safety. But this only agitated him further as he grew louder and more belligerent by the minute. Then before I could even process what was happening, he started aggressively rummaging around in his jacket pockets, slurring that I needed to pay up and give him money for his troubles right now. My adrenaline instantly spiked through the roof when he abruptly produced and waved a pocket knife dangerously close to my face, its sharp blade glinting. He continued shouting irrational demands for me to hand over my wallet and anything of value right this second unless I wanted to get hurt. I knew I needed to think and act fast before the situation escalated any further or became deadly. So in one impulsively smooth move, I slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a hard, lurching stop that sent the unprepared passenger crashing forward against the seats. The second we were fully halted, I instantly flung open the driver's side door. Racing around to the rear doors, I managed to grab and wrench open the one nearest me before the stunned passenger could reorient himself. We tussled violently as I somehow managed to wrestle the knife out of his flailing grip. He was so profoundly intoxicated that he couldn't put up much of an actual fight, but was still screaming threats the entire time as we struggled. Finally, I was able to shove him out onto the sidewalk curb. Without looking back, I sped off down the road to pull over at a safe distance and call the cops immediately. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the phone as I recounted the harrowing incident to the shocked operator. She firmly assured me officers were already on their way to apprehend the passenger before he could attack or mug anyone else tonight. She also reiterated that I had done exactly the right thing by diffusing the situation without further escalating what could have become an even more deadly confrontation. The police called me back later in the night to confirm they had successfully taken the belligerent would-be robber into custody. He was being charged with felony assault with a deadly weapon, public intoxication, attempted robbery, and a number of other crimes. I was intensely relieved to know he was now off the street, unable to endanger myself or any other rideshare drivers and passengers that night. After such a jarringly close call, I became much warier about accepting ride requests, especially at night or from busy club areas. I started taking basic precautions, like confirming passenger identities before they entered my vehicle and keeping pepper spray easily accessible. Thankfully, the majority of my fares were polite commuters or groups just trying to get home responsibly. But that genuinely life-threatening encounter reminded me I couldn't ever get too comfortable because ride-sharing, especially late night, does carry very real risks. As the sober driver, I was responsible for trying to anticipate and diffuse any situation before it turned ugly. Unstable, reckless individuals frequently see drivers as easy targets, and their rash behavior under the influence can turn a routine trip into a deadly one very quickly, as I learned firsthand. I know many fellow Uber and Lyft drivers who have been assaulted, robbed at gunpoint, or worse, while simply trying to do their job shuttling people from point A to B. We provide an important service helping people get home safely, yet put ourselves at risk each time we start a new trip. It's discouraging how little actual protection or support drivers seem to get from the profitable rideshare companies themselves. For the time being, I do still cautiously drive some weekend nights when I'm especially cash-strapped. But I'm now hyper-vigilant about my surroundings at all times and take every possible precaution to avoid being caught off guard again. One knife-wielding passenger was enough to teach me this gig isn't nearly as easy or routine as it may appear from the outside. We drivers have to prioritize our own safety first and foremost, since it's clear no one else will. Wow, let me tell you about this day. I had the most deeply unsettling experience taking an Uber early one morning last week when I was already running dangerously late for work. The male driver who picked me up almost immediately began making crude, inappropriate remarks and asking horribly invasive personal questions about my personal life the entire ride. I was completely mortified but felt trapped alone in the car with him. It was one of the most uncomfortable, unsafe situations I've ever been in, and I couldn't get away fast enough when we reached my office. I immediately reported the driver so no other female passengers would have to endure his harassment. Monday morning had already been frazzling and stressful after I slept through multiple alarms and found myself rushing to get ready with barely any time to spare before I absolutely had to be at the office. In my frenzied state, I completely blanked that I should have just taken public transit and been late. Instead, I hastily requested an Uber in hopes that the quicker ride would get me there just slightly past my start time. Looking back now, I should have happily accepted being late over what transpired. The Uber pulled up outside my apartment building and I hopped in flustered, already spouting apologies for my rushed state. The driver was likely in his mid-40s with greasy shoulder-length hair and days-old wrinkled clothes that gave off an unkempt vibe. Right from the start, as we pulled away from the curb, he began making comments about my appearance that immediately put me on edge. He leered at me in the rear-view mirror and said I had gotten myself all cleaned up nice this morning, and he was curious what a sweet young professional thing like me was doing riding in his car so early. I murmured a vague one-word answer, already extremely uncomfortable with his tone and the way his eyes scraped over me. But I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, and that he was just an overly chatty driver attempting harmless conversation. That illusion was promptly shattered when he then wanted to know if I had a boyfriend or not, because it was apparently such a shame a gorgeous girl like me was wasting her looks on the corporate world when I could be dating real men like him. I stiffly told him I preferred not to discuss my personal life with strangers, but instead of taking the very obvious hint, the driver persisted, suggesting that maybe my stuck-up fancy office job would let me go out sometime with a down-to-earth guy like himself, instead of the weak, wimpy, yuppie bankers I was likely around all day. I was utterly appalled by his wildly inappropriate presumptions and requests, and sank down awkwardly in the seat, willing the ride to be over soon. But when I declined to engage with his vulgar remarks, the driver only seemed to take it as a challenge, growing bolder with his harassment as I stared silently out the window. He started sizing up my body, commenting that he could tell I clearly work out because I had such a smoking hot figure on me. He crassly stated what a shame it was that I wore unflattering conservative business clothes that covered up my shape, telling me point blank that he wished my skirt was shorter. By this point, I was beyond mortified and fighting back tears, feeling completely trapped alone in the car with this repulsive man who was objectifying me and making such inappropriate and lewd comments. But I was also fearful that yelling at him or angering him in any way could make the situation worse, so I remained frozen in tense silence, praying we'd arrive soon. Of course, my lack of response only seemed to egg on his predatory behavior, as he then casually propositioned me, asking if I liked one-night stands or how adventurous in the bedroom I was. I was utterly disgusted, but managed to sternly tell him his unsolicited questions were highly inappropriate, and that he needed to stop talking to me that way. Unfortunately, that mere request sparked his repulsive mind to then launch into shockingly graphic detail about what acts he wished he could do to me in the backseat of the car if we just had more time before I had to be at the office. He claimed he could tell I wasn't actually offended, but secretly totally into it and tempted by his advances. By the time we were finally pulling up outside my office building, I felt defiled, shaken, and so unsettled I could barely speak. As I hurried to escape and this man called out a crude request for a date, all I could focus on was getting into the building where I knew I'd be safe. Work was now the absolute furthest thing from my mind as I tried to process the trauma of what had just occurred. The very second I was alone inside the elevator, I opened the Uber app and reported the driver for his aggressive behavior and harassment, leaving a detailed review of how his inappropriate remarks left me feeling disgusted and afraid. Later that day, I received a reply apologizing for my experience and assuring me the driver had been permanently banned from their platform. It was a small relief knowing he wouldn't be able to violate and torment other women the way he had with me. I was on edge for days afterwards, however, thinking about how much worse things could have gone if I were in a more isolated area alone with that predator. It pains me deeply that this is a common threat women face in rideshares that most men rarely have to even contemplate. I'm thankful I managed to make it out of that Uber intact, but it highlighted how dangerously vulnerable passengers can be, especially when alone with male drivers. No job obligation will ever be worth what could happen if a driver decides to take advantage of being in a position of power over a female rider. This was just one more instance of the grim realities we as women constantly have to be on guard for in this world. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.